You must understand that the relationship between the narcissist and the empath is not merely a dynamic between two personalities. It is the meeting of two ancient forces that have danced together since the dawn of consciousness, the predator of the soul and the healer of the wound, locked in a silent contract that neither consciously remembers signing. And yet when one of these forces withdraws from the dance, when the empath ceases to move in the rhythm of appeasement, something profound occurs. The narcissist who once found nourishment in the empire's unending supply of attention begins to face an emptiness they have spent their entire life fleeing. It is here that the psychological mask, the persona, begins to slip. The narcissist persona is an elaborate construction, an ornate armor built to conceal the trembling child within. The one whose need for recognition was once met with neglect, criticism, or conditional love. As long as the empath plays along, this armor remains intact, polished, and convincing. But when the empath refuses to continue the unspoken agreement to reflect back to the narcissist their carefully crafted image, the armor begins to crack. And when the armor cracks, the shadow leaks through the shadow, for the narcissist is not merely a collection of unflattering traits. It is the repository of their most unbearable truths. It contains the shame they cannot name, the fear of worthlessness they cannot bear to feel, and the hunger for love they dare not admit. When the empath's gaze is no longer there to validate the false self, the narcissist feels the shadow pressing closer, threatening to engulf them. They may rage, they may retreat. They may suddenly reinvent themselves to lure the empath back into the familiar cycle. But no matter the strategy, the deeper reality is the same. Without the empath's reflection, the narcissist stands before a mirror that no longer lies. This moment is one of great danger, but also of strange potential. The danger lies in the narcissist's capacity for psychic violence, the ways they might strike out to restore the old equilibrium. The potential lies in the fact that if they could bear to face the shadow instead of projecting it, an alchemical process might begin. But such transformation is rare. More often the narcissist is stripped of their supply, becomes an amplified version of what they already were. More desperate, more volatile, more insistent on control. You have taken away the sun from which they drew their power, and now they must find another or risk being consumed by the darkness within. From a symbolic perspective, the empath's withdrawal is akin to the moon turning away from the sun. The light that once reflected the sun's glory is no longer offered, and the sun, unable to see itself in the night, begins to fear. It has gone out entirely. In myths, this is the moment when the false king reveals himself as a tyrant or collapses into madness. The mask was never the self. It was a performance sustained by the willing audience. When the audience walks out, the actor is left alone on an empty stage, the silence louder than any applause. In my clinical experience, and in the dreams patients bring me, this shift often appears in symbolic form long before it happens in waking life. The empath might dream of locking a door and hearing pounding on the other side, or of a great banquet hall growing cold and dim as they walk away from the table. The narcissist's dreams, if they are ever shared, might feature themes of humiliation, a public stripping away of their titles, clothes, or possessions. The unconscious is always rehearsing the inevitable fracture between illusion and truth. When you as the empath finally stop playing along, you are withdrawing not only your energy but your complicity. This act sends a tremor through the narcissist's psychic structure. For years, perhaps decades, they have relied on external mirrors to maintain their self-image. These mirrors are not just people. They are roles, achievements, and symbols of status. But people like you, sensitive, intuitive, endlessly forgiving, are the most prized mirrors, because you reflect back not only their glory but also their innocence. When you stop, it is as though you have taken away the most flattering mirror in the house, leaving them with only the cracked one in the attic, the one they have avoided all their life. And so, who does the narcissist become? Some become hunters, scouring the landscape for a new empire to replace the old. Some become ghosts, retreating into a world of fantasy in self-isolation. Others become tyrants, attempting to force the lost reflection back through intimidation, guilt, or manipulation. In archetypal terms, they may become the wounded king raging against the sub, objects who no longer kneel, or the sorcerer whose spells fail when the apprentice walks away. But beneath all these variations lies the same truth. The narcissist without an empath is like a shadow without a light. It still exists, but it cannot move as it once did. Here is where the mystical dimension emerges. Your withdrawal does not merely change the narcissist. It changes the field in which you both exist. Relationships are living psychic ecosystems. When one organism changes its behavior, the entire ecosystem must adapt. By refusing to feed the narcissist's false self, you create a vacuum, and in the unconscious. A vacuum is an invitation for transformation or for destruction. If the narcissist cannot transform, they will seek to destroy the conditions that threaten their survival. This is why the period after an empath's withdrawal can be the most dangerous. It is also why it can be the most liberating for the empath. This is the crossing of a threshold. You are stepping out of an archetypal role, the healer, the sacrificial one, the mirror of redemption, and into the unknown territory of self-defense. This is not merely a psychological act, it is an initiation. The old myths speak. Of heroes who must leave behind their companions to face the dark forest alone. What they rarely mention is that some of those companions were never true allies, but enchantments designed to keep the hero from their own power. The narcissist may accuse you of betrayal, of cruelty, of abandoning them in their hour of need. They may weave elaborate stories in which you are the villain. This is projection, the shadow at work, but it is also a desperate attempt to restore the old narrative. For if you are wrong, then they can remain right. If you are selfish, they can remain the noble sufferer. The most painful thing for the narcissist is not the loss of the empath's love, but the loss of the story in which they were the central figure. I have seen in the symbolic language of dreams and visions. The narcissist's transformation after such a loss. Sometimes they appear as a king stripped of his robes wandering in the wilderness. Sometimes as a wounded animal lashing out at anyone who comes near, and sometimes in rare cases as a figure who finally kneels before their own shadow, beginning the long and painful work of integration. This last path is the only one that leads to true wholeness, but it requires the narcissist to endure what they fear most, the collapse of the false self and the confrontation with the abandoned child within. It is here that the empath must understand your withdrawal is not punishment. It is the only act that honors both souls. By refusing to play along, you offer the narcissist the only real chance they may ever have to meet themselves. Whether they take that chance is not yours to control in this letting go. You also meet yourself, not as the endless giver, but as the guardian of your own psychic life. And so the dance ends, or at least changes. The music fades, the lights dim, and you step away from the stage. Behind you, the narcissist stands in the half-light, unsure of who they are, without the reflection you once provided. Before you, the path is unlit, but it is yours. And in that darkness, if you listen closely, you may hear another voice. Not the voice of the narcissist calling you back, but the voice of your own soul whispering, "Now we begin." And when the empath steps away, the first thing the narcissist encounters is not the absence of you, but the presence of themselves. This is a subtle yet shattering shift for their entire arc. High texture of being has been designed to avoid that encounter. Their psychic energy, which was once projected outward toward you in constant pursuit of validation, now collapses inward. At first, they may attempt to fill the void with distractions, new admirers, grand declarations, or sudden ventures meant to signal their independence. But these are mages designed for the outer world, incapable of touching the inner desert that begins to stretch before them. You see, the narcissist has spent years, perhaps a lifetime, constructing a fortress against the core wound. This fortress is made not of stone, but of roles: the charming seducer, the victim in need of rescue, the leader whose power demands respect, the misunderstood genius whose greatness the world has failed to recognize. Each role is a mask, and each mask is a way of saying, "Do not look at what lies beneath." But when you withdraw, you take with you the most essential ingredient of their illusion, the audience who believes it without your steady gaze affirming their script. The fortress does not collapse in flames. It crumbles quietly, one stone at a time, until they find themselves exposed to the night air of their own psyche from the perspective of the unconscious. This moment is archetypal. It is the descent into the underworld, the stripping away of royal garments, the shattering of the enchanted mirror. In myth, the hero who loses their crown must face the monsters that dwell beneath the palace. For the narcissist, these monsters are the unprocessed grief, the shame, and the self-loathing they have hidden behind charisma or cruelty. The Empire's departure is the call to this underworld, but unlike the mythic hero, The narcissist rarely answers willingly. They claw at the surface, desperate to avoid the descent, because to face what waits there would mean the death of the persona they have mistaken for the self. And yet beneath all their resistance, the unconscious moves with a will of its own. Dreams begin to change, where once the narcissist dreamed of victory, seduction, and admiration. They may now dream of endless corridors that lead nowhere, of mirrors that show no reflection, of voices calling from the dark. The unconscious is not cruel, it is insistent. It seeks wholeness. Even when the conscious mind seeks control, this is why the empath's withdrawal is not merely a loss. It is an initiation for both female. Or you, the empath. The withdrawal is the beginning of individuation. You have lived for so long in the gravitational pull of another's need that you may not know where you end, and they begin. By stepping away, you enter a liminal space, a psychic twilight, in which your own image begins to return to you. At first, it may be disorienting. You may feel the phantom pull of their expectations, the echo of their voice inside your own thoughts. The part of you that was trained to anticipate their moods will still listen for their storms. This is the residue of archetypal possession. When one figure in the psyche dominates the field of awareness, shaping your identity around their needs. In this twilight, you may also find your dreams shifting. You might see yourself walking through empty rooms, discovering doors you had never opened before. You might dream of finding an old garment, a cloak, a dress, a robe that you had forgotten was yours. These are symbols of the self returning the soul, reclaiming the garments it once laid aside to play the role of caretaker, healer, or redeemer. In Jungian analysis, such dreams are signs that the psyche is rebalancing its energies, that the archetype of the self is stirring beneath the ruins of the old dynamic. Meanwhile, the narcissist's path without you becomes a study in compensations. Some will overinflate, building an even grander facade to shield themselves from the wound. Others will implode, retreating into isolation, convinced that they have been fatally wronged. In rare and remarkable cases, the absence of the empath's mirroring will force them to confront the unendurable truth that their hunger for control and admiration was born of a primal terror of abandonment. If they can bear to stand in that fire without rushing to extinguish it, something extraordinary can happen. The false self can crack enough for the real self to emerge. But this emergence is not glorious. It is raw, trembling, and profoundly human. It is the face they have hidden even from themselves. I have often said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When you withdraw, you are forcing the narcissist, whether they recognize it or not, to face that darkness, and in doing so, you are also forced to face your own. For it is not by accident that you were drawn into this dance. Somewhere in your OWN psychic history lies a place that resonated with theirs. Perhaps you too once believed that love must be earned through constant giving, that peace comes only when others are pleased. These beliefs are the invisible threads that bound you to them. To cut these threads is not only to release them, it is to release yourself from the ancient wound that taught you to bind your worth to another's satisfaction. When the empath stops playing along, a strange inversion occurs. The narcissist who once appeared powerful begins to unravel. The empath who once felt powerless begins to see the truth of their strength. It is not a strength forged in domination, but in refusal, the refusal to abandon oneself in the service of another's illusion. This is the quiet, unshakable strength of the self emerging from the shadow, the moment in which the inner sovereign awakens. And yet the path from here is not without its trials. The narcissist may return cloaked in remorse, speaking words that seem to echo genuine change. They may draw upon the shared history, reminding you of the moments when their mask was almost convincing enough to seem like love. They may promise transformation. Here, discernment becomes the empath's greatest ally. True transformation in the narcissist is rare, and it is never rapid. It is slow, painful, and marked by an increasing willingness to feel what they have spent their lives avoiding. Without that willingness, all change is costume. In the mystical language of the psyche, when one figure leaves the stage, another must enter. By leaving the narcissist theater, you make room for a different actor, the archetype of the self, the inner guide, the one who has been waiting behind the curtains for the moment the false drama ends. It will speak to you not in demands, but in invitations. It will not drain you, but nourish you. And as you listen to it, you will begin to remember that you were never merely a reflection for another story. You were, and the central figure of your own. The narcissist, meanwhile, will be forced to choose. They can seek another empath, continuing the cycle until it collapses again. Or they can turn toward the mirror that no longer flatters them and begin the long journey toward wholeness. That journey may never begin in this lifetime. But by stepping away, you have planted the seed of possibility, and in the realm of the soul, everywhere. And the smallest seed can in time split stone. Time has its own alchemy in the psyche. In the weeks and months after you step away, the immediate heat of rupture cools into something more revealing. Both you and the narcissist begin to inhabit different psychic seasons, though your paths remain connected by the invisible threads of what was shared. For you, this is the season of return, not to them, but to the forgotten landscapes within yourself. For them, it is the season of reckoning, a slow, often unconscious confrontation with the hunger that drove them, now stripped of its familiar source. In my work, I have seen how the unconscious continues to weave its images, especially in dreams, to speak. What the waking mind resists, the empath, freed from the daily erosion of their energy, often begins to dream of open spaces, forests with hidden paths, seas that stretch beyond the horizon, sky that feels endless. These are not mere symbols of escape. They are expressions of psychic expansion. Your soul, long pressed into the narrow corridors of someone else's fortress, begins to stretch its limbs again. It is the archetype of the wanderer emerging, calling you into territories where your worth is not defined by service, but by being. The narcissist's dreams, in contrast, often turn claustrophobic. They may dream of houses where the walls are closing in, of stages where the lights go out, of voices in the distance that no longer answer when called in archetypal terms. This is the beginning of the descent into the wasteland. The same wasteland the wounded king must enter in myth when the land reflects the barrenness of his own heart. Without the emperor's mirroring, the narcissist loses not only their preferred image, but also their anchor to the external world's validation. It is not uncommon for them to seek replacements, but no replacement ever fits as precisely as the original dance partner. There is always a subtle friction, a lack of resonance, because what they truly seek is not a new empath, but the restoration of the old reflection. Here is a truth that the empath often discovers late. When you step away, you are not only freeing yourself from their hold, you are freeing them from the illusion that someone else can complete the work they refuse to do. In the moment, it may not feel like liberation for either of you. It may feel like loss or grief, disorientation, the psyche values truth above comfort, and in withdrawing you have delivered a truth too heavy to offer with words alone. You have said without speaking, I will no longer participate in the denial of your shadow. From the mystical perspective, every relationship is a crucible. The narcissist-empath dynamic is a particularly intense one because it is forged from complementary wounds. The narcissist fears annihilation without control. The empath fears abandonment without giving. Together, these fears lock into a perfect circuit. Energy flows endlessly from one to the other, each reinforcing the other's patterns. To break that circuit is to trigger both fears simultaneously. And yet without that rupture, neither soul moves closer to individuation. The months after the break are when the archetypes shift most powerfully. For the empath, the archetype of the caregiver begins to loosen its grip. In its place, the sovereign may begin to emerge. Not the false sovereign who rules others, but the inner ruler who governs themselves. You may notice subtle changes in your boundaries, in the way you speak, in the ease with which you now say no without the old guilt. These are not merely psychological improvements. They are signs of the self taking the throne within, of your psyche reorganizing itself around your own center rather than another's. The narcissist in their own shadowed way faces a parallel initiation. Without a devoted empath to absorb their projections, they may begin often reluctantly to recognize patterns in their own behavior. This recognition may come in flashes, quickly dismissed, or in the sting of relationships that end in similar ways. If the narcissist is capable of reflection, these repetitions can become the first cracks in the wall of denial. But here lies the critical difference. The empath transformation often begins immediately upon withdrawal, while the narcissist may take years, even decades, this to reach the point where genuine self-confrontation is possible. In some rare cases, I have seen what happens when the narcissist truly turns inward after the empath's departure. It is a harrowing process. The false self dies slowly, and each death feels like a loss of identity. They grieve the masks, the roles, the certainty that others would always orbit them. If they persist, if they allow themselves to feel the grief rather than project it outward, they begin to encounter the inner child, the archetype of the divine child, wounded and buried. This meeting can be transformative, but it is also terrifying, for it asks them to love what they have despised in themselves. And you, the empath, may feel their pull even across the distance. Energy is not bound by physical space. The psychic cords forged in such relationships can tug at you long after the dance ends. In dreams, they may appear at your door, or you may find yourself back in the old rooms wondering how you returned. These are not necessarily signs that you should reopen the connection. They are invitations from your unconscious to see whether any part of you still lives in that old role. As long as that part remains unclaimed, the cord will hum with tension. To truly sever it is to reclaim every fragment of yourself that once served their story. Eventually, if you stay the course, you will feel the shift. The longing will soften, the memories will lose their sting, and the figure of the narcissist will become less a living presence and more an archetypal teacher in your personal myth. You will see them not only as the one who drained you, but as the one who, by draining you, forced you to confront the deeper wound that made you offer yourself without end. This is not forgiveness in the conventional sense. It is integration. To integrate is to take back the energy you left in another's hands, to weave it back into the tapestry of your own being. The narcissist, if they do not change, will find another empath and repeat the cycle. But even then, you withdraw remains a silent message in their psyche, a crack in the mirror that no new reflection can entirely erase. On some level, perhaps only at the threshold of sleep, perhaps only in the quietest hours, they will remember the one who walked away. And with that memory comes the seed of a question they may one day dare to ask. Who am I without someone else to see me? And for you, the answer will already be blooming. You will know that you are not defined by the role you played, nor by the reflection you provided, nor by the wounds that once drew you to their side. You are the dreamer who has awakened from the dream, the wanderer who has stepped beyond the gates of the old kingdom, the soul who has turned toward the inner horizon and begun the journey home. There comes a moment long after the parting when the air around the story changes. It is no longer charged with the static of old battles, nor heavy with the grief of separation. It becomes instead a kind of stillness, the stillness that follows a storm. When the ground is soaked and the air smells of renewal, in this stillness, the shapes of what truly happened begin to reveal themselves with greater clarity. You see, the break between empath and narcissist is not simply a personal drama. It is the visible surface of an ancient psychic pattern unraveling in the collective. The empath and the narcissist are not random opposites. They are drawn together because they embody complementary distortions of the same archetype, the lover. In the empath, the lover archetype is turned outward entirely, pouring life force into the other in hopes of communion. In the narcissist, the lover is turned inward and distorted into self-adoration, a desperate attempt to replace the love never fully received. Together they form a closed loop. One gives, one takes, both avoiding the deeper, more frightening task to turn the gaze inward, not in self-obsession, but in self-reunion. When the empath withdraws, the loop is broken, energy stops flowing in the old circuit, and both are forced to face the emptiness inside the pattern. For the narcissist, this emptiness feels like starvation. For the empath, it feels like silence. Starvation drives the narcissist outward toward replacements, distractions, battles to reassert control. Silence drives the empaths inward toward the inner terrain they abandoned, while tending to someone else's needs. This is why your paths diverged so sharply after the split. One runs from the inner world, the other, though afraid, begins to step into it. This inner stepping is not a single heroic act, but a slow procession. The empath learns to recognize their own projections, to feel the discomfort of not being needed, to rebuild an identity that is not defined by service. And in that rebuilding, something remarkable occurs. The same sensitivity that once bound you to the narcissist's moods becomes a refined instrument for hearing the voice of your own soul. This is individuation in its purest form, the slow shaping of a life that grows from your center outward, not from someone else's center inward. The narcissist road is harder not because they are incapable of change, but because change for them requires a dismantling of the very self-image they have sworn to protect at all costs. To turn towards their own shadow is to admit that the empire they built within was a facade. Such admissions feel like death to the ego, and so many will avoid it, seeking instead another example to mirror them back into being. But even when they succeed in finding one, the seed you left behind remains the knowledge, however faint, that the mirror can walk away. That knowledge is corrosive to the illusion of permanence, and over time, it can become the first crack in the fortress. It is tempting to measure healing by whether the other changes, but in the work of the soul. The measure is not the transformation of the other, it is the liberation of the self. Your freedom does not depend on their awakening. It depends on your willingness to keep walking, even when the old pole tugs at you like a familiar tide. Freedom is not a single escape. It is the daily act of choosing not to re-enter the dream you have outgrown. As this choice becomes more natural, you may begin to see the entire relationship not as a separate of years or a tragedy of mismatched hearts, but as a rite of passage. You entered as oneself and left as another, you or I. Initiated through fire, not by choice but by necessity. The fire was the friction of two psyches locked in archetypal combat. The part of you that longed to heal them and the part of them that longed to possess you when that fire burned through the illusions. What remained was the core of you, stripped of its old disguises, and perhaps in the great quiet that follows, you will encounter them again. If not in the flesh, then in memory, in dream, in the subtle corridors of the psyche, where all figures from our past still walk. You may see them differently then, not as the enemy who drained you, nor as the tragic figure you failed to save, but as a teacher who spoke in the language of your deepest wound. In that moment, the wound is no longer only a site of pain. It is a site of wisdom. You will know then that you have taken back what was always yours. This is the final transformation, not theirs. But yours, the narcissist without an empath, may never change. They may continue their journey as they began endlessly seeking the mirror that will never truly satisfy. But you, having stepped beyond the dance, will carry the imprint of this initiation into every step you take. You will recognize the signs of the old pattern before it takes root. You will feel the subtle shift in your body when someone demands your light without offering their own, and you will walk away without the guilt that once chained you to the stage. And so the answer to the question, who does the narcissist become when the empath stops playing along, is not a single image, but a spectrum. Some become more desperate shadows of their former selves. Some retreat into isolation. A few, the ray of few, begin the difficult descent toward their own truth. But perhaps the more important answer is this: who do you become when you stop playing along? For in the end, the soul's work is not to reform another's mask, but to remove your own and to meet yourself standing there in the clear, unreflected light. In that meeting, the dance is truly over, not because the music has stopped, but because you have learned to move to a rhythm that was never theirs to set. And that above all is the freedom neither the narcissist nor their illusion can ever take from you.